Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. I have a question for you that we start out all the time, but this question I'm almost guaranteeing that you've asked. Maybe you've asked inside, or maybe you've asked it or made this statement on the actual outside and told somebody. But have you ever thought or said, I wish I had more time? I hear this so often from so many people. So I found an expert in time and I want to unpack this today. So I'm honored to be hanging out with David Buck. How are you today, sir?
Dave, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. We're excited to unpack this. You're the owner of a company called Infinity Lifestyle Design. So fill us in on what Infinity Lifestyle Design is.
Well, it is tied back to this concept of time. We live, my personal belief is we live for a finite period of time, but then eventually we're going to experience time infinity. It's going to go on. So the idea behind the infinity lifestyle design is to help people use their time as productively as possible so they feel like they're getting more time. We all we all consume time at the same rate. A second for you is a second for me, but we
Sure.
use it differently. And I want people to use it differently so they feel like they have more time, almost like it's infinite.
Wow. So consume versus use. That's a really interesting concept, and we'll unpack that a little bit more. I'm curious to know, and the audience is curious to know, how did you get to this spot? Were you like 4 years old and like, man, when I grow up, I'm gonna, learn all about time? Or I know you were in corporate America, so we love hearing that journey. So fill us in on what, you were in corporate America and then you started your own business. People love to hear about that journey. So share with us that if you would, David.
Well, thanks for asking, and I'm happy to share. I would love to say that as a young kid, I was always amazingly organized and stuff, but actually, no, it for most of my life, I did everything in the last minute. And it's so much so it was a joke between my mom and I, 'cause she'd be like, Have you even started your homework? Don't worry, mom. I work best under pressure. And I found first off in college that that's not a great strategy to have in college.
Sure.
And so when I started corporate world, I have been in business development. It's a fancy word for sales for my career. And I found early on, and please heavy on the sarcasm here, that these stunningly good looks and amazing personality were not going to get me very far in the sales world. And I found that when I was better prepared than my competition, that I usually got the sale. And
Sure.
then I also found that as I began to use my time well, that afforded me greater opportunities to sell. And then when I found, gosh, if I help my clients make it as easy as possible for them to do business with me, i.e., they were able to not struggle with their time, that also helped. And that really became a theme throughout my career as I began to manage people. I've always said I've had much better pure salespeople than me report to me amazingly in their skill set. Where I brought value was say, let's help you use your time better so you can spend more time selling what you do well versus the administrative stuff that you seem to struggle with and try to catch up on. And gosh, I want to say probably about 5 years ago, I found myself helping friends of friends, people I know didn't know. They'd be like, "Oh, you seem to manage your time well. Help me."
Sure.
And I eventually said, "I think there's a side hustle here." So I started about 4 years ago, my company just as a side hustle and found that it actually consumed more of my time. And I had to make a choice
Yeah.
between do I stay in corporate world or do I go all in? And that's when I
Sure.
decided to go all in.
Wow, that's awesome. And we love to talk about that because we've heard so many different stories in our hundreds of episodes that we've had with all these different people doing it all these ways. So think about what David said. He had a job, a career, successful. you could have easily just stayed in that and landed in your whenever you wanted to retire, and life would have been good, right? But was
Correct.
there like something missing? Did you feel like that was scratching the itch, so to speak, or did you feel like there was more, and that's what caused you to jump into that?
Yeah, I felt like it's almost like I was given permission, and what I mean by that is I was blessed early on with parents who were like, "You need to save for the future." And literally my first job, my parents are like, "What are you doing to save for the future?" And I'm going, I want gas money so I can go out with my friends."
Yeah.
And
Yep.
but that stuck. And so basically I hit a point where we were financially viable to step forward with it. And so that afforded me that discipline, and then time that I invested there afforded
Sure.
me the opportunity to step out knowing I needed to make that choice.
Wow. Well, great words of wisdom for maybe somebody listening today, David, that's younger in their career, and maybe they have this desire to start a business, but they don't see that path. What a great word to be able to say, hey, why not just start saving some money? It feels like today we always are saving for something, and if we don't have that for, then all of a sudden we decide, well, then it doesn't make sense. I'm just going to spend it. So for anyone listening that wants to get into their own business in their future, start saving now. What a great thing. And it's way easier because I had somebody on the show, David, that was married, and 6 days later, after they got married, they didn't tell their wife. They quit their job. They came home and said, honey, I quit my job. I'm starting this business. And needless to say, it was not easy waters. They made it. Lord, Lord was good to them. But it was like, oh my gosh, when you think about that, that's usually a recipe for some issues. I don't know about your wife, but mine would be like, excuse me, what just happened here?
Yeah, that
So
that would be a much deeper discussion.
right, exactly, right. It wouldn't be one at the local restaurant. So fast forward. So now you start this. So you're in this time world, and I know that there's like words that some people say you can't manage time. You were talking about consume versus use. So for you, how do you define time management? I guess let's start there. Is that the right wording for you to use, for us to use in your mind?
So I am not a fan of the phrase time management. And, for everybody out there, it's not to be critical of it. But what I have found, particularly in my work with clients and the data that I collect, when people say I'm trying to manage their time, they're usually reactive.
Okay.
Something comes their way and they may manage that time really well, but time management tends to be a first in, first out mentality at the
Mm,
expense of usually other things that have been planned. And
okay.
so I really try to challenge people to say, if you're managing your time, you're probably reactive. I like to flip the script and say, invest some time planning up front so you're proactive, knowing you're never going to get it right. But it's still worth the time to invest it, because then you're setting yourself up to help prioritize your time better and negotiate with others when people want to use your time to help them.
So I always hear people talk about like planning your week. Like, like that? I'm trying to get pretty practical here. Like, do you suggest people planning their week like on Friday afternoon? Do you suggest them planning it on Monday morning? Does it not matter? Have you seen anything better or worse on that front, for example?
I recommend a two-step process. I
Okay.
recommend typically Fridays, because it's the end of the week, that
Okay.
you plan 2 weeks ahead,
Okay.
but with the mindset that I use the analogy of wet cement. So the idea is that when cement is poured into a foundation, it needs support around it before it cures.
Hmm.
There's still time to manipulate it. So think of it as I'm pouring a foundation, knowing that it's going to be cured only when it's in the past. So do 2 weeks ahead of time. But then you do a cadence of where you start in the morning. So let's say you plan the next 2 weeks out. On Monday morning, you gut check yourself to say, is that day still the way I think it's going to be? And
Sure.
even though you think it is, it's probably not, because something's going to change. So then at the end of the day, you then evaluate to say, how did I do on Monday? What do I have to change and adapt on Tuesday? It doesn't take long. It can be 15 minutes or so. And then you wake up in the morning on Tuesday, do it all over again, and you get this cadence. And the reason why I say do it once in the evening and once in the morning again is we live in a digital world that's 24 hours. And
Yeah.
I know I get a lot of communication overnight that could change my day for the next day. So as you
Gotcha.
do this, you find yourself, you're using less time and giving yourself more quality time.
Wow. So I get this question a lot because they're like, you don't understand how many interruptions I get in a day. You don't understand. I love to plan my week, but I have customers, I have a team, I have vendors, whatever, right? There's these people that have
Mhm.
access to my calendar, however that is. What percentage? Because I always am like, well, you can't plan 100%. I mean, it's not like from 8 in the morning until 5 at night if those are the hours that you work. 8:15, 8:30. You can't do it in those pieces. I don't think. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. But what percentage of your week are you trying to ideally plan? And then what percentage do you leave for like those interruptions?
So I plan 100%, but let me put a big caveat to that.
Okay.
The idea behind planning 100% again is to put yourself in a position to negotiate those interruptions. If it's a client, a lot of times you're probably going to adapt or adjust. If you're still working in corporate life, a boss can have a lot of challenges there.
Sure.
But if it's on your calendar, it affords you a negotiation to at least say to a client, hey, uh, how does tomorrow at this point work? Now they might say, no, I need you now. You'll have to adapt. But the idea is that so many people, when they prioritize the activities for the day, they treat everything equally. And this is where I challenge to say, if you think 5 solid things you have to get done today, decide which are the absolute ones that you must do. So whether it's 2 or 3, those are hard put into your calendar. And those are ones you're going to be very rigid about changing if you don't
Okay.
have to. Then the balance of those 2 or 3 or however many they are get put into what I call a flex time frame. So let's say I'm going to try to work on those from say 3:30 to 5. They're at the end of the day, they're lower, and knowing if you don't get those done, it's not the end of the world, and you can plug them in at a future time frame. That affords you to say, if you are interrupted or during the day, you can say, okay, I'm going to move this because a client needed me. That gets moved to the flex time at the end of the day, and I'll reschedule and do things. And when you do that, you're getting done with the most important stuff first, and you're rescheduling the less important things.
Gotcha. So is that, because I've heard that a lot, David, where you really should schedule or need to schedule the most important things early in the day? Is that kind of, I mean, to get those done first, I guess, rather than early in the day? Is there research that shows that's the smart way to do it? Or what are your thoughts when it comes to, these 3 big chunks of things I have to get done today? Do you suggest doing them right away? Do you suggest spreading them out? What have you seen work for other people?
That's a great question. And we all have an identified productivity zone. I'm an
Okay,
early morning person, so I find myself being more productive in the morning. But there are others that, gosh, after lunch, I hit a zone. So, first of all, you have to identify your productivity zone. And we all know that naturally. We can say, gosh, I find myself more productive at this time of the day if it's possible, given what you do. And again, if you're an entrepreneur, you have a little bit more flexibility to do that. I understand if you're working in a structured corporate environment, it's a little less easy, but
sure.
you try to plug in the areas of your productivity zone. Now, the good news is if you're saying, well, my productivity zone's in the afternoon, but I have to work in the morning. You can adjust your productivity zone, but it takes some work on your end. It takes on maybe changing your sleep patterns, changing your diet, choosing when you eat, choosing when you exercise. those elements on the personal care side can help you shift your productivity zone if you need to, but it takes an investment of time.
Wow. I would have never have thought of that because, yeah, for me, I'm an early riser and I don't know if I can even get up early enough. So it's weird for me because we live in the Midwest and then we have a house on the West Coast. Well, I get up at 5 o'clock in the Midwest and then I go out to San Diego and my sleep pattern's like at 3 o'clock because it's 5 o'clock here. I'm like ready to get up. I get up, I'm like, it's 3 in the morning here. There's nothing going on. So,
Right. Right.
you have to kinda adjust that. I would have never have thought that's brilliant to identify your productivity zone and then, adjust it if needed. So
Thank you.
is it hard? Are there any tips that you have to adjust that productivity zone that you've seen work?
Short incremental. So if you're like I'm at, let's say your productivity zones from 3 to 5, you are one of the end of the day people, and you need to be an 8 to 10 person.
Sure.
Short incremental steps. You're going to have
Okay.
to understand, maybe I start going to bed a half an hour earlier than what I normally do. And over time, that becomes maybe 2 or 3 hours. When you eat, maybe instead of eating later in the evening, I shift all that stuff. And so to me, give yourself a 90-day plan
Mm.
with small incremental steps if you need to make big changes.
Wow, that's awesome. That is so cool. Hey, we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, I wanna talk about your book, The Time Optimized Life, because I have some questions there. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm honored to be hanging out with David Buck. He is the owner of Infinity Lifestyle Design, and we've been talking about time and not time management. Is there another word, David, as we move into this deeper? Is there another word? I know you talk about time optimization. So, like, what's the difference between time management and time optimization on your in the research you've done?
Well, yeah, thanks for mentioning the book, and that is the idea of optimization. That's where I want people to think that. And we talked earlier about time management being
Yeah.
reactive. Time optimization is proactive, and I actually get it from the concept of lean manufacturing.
Mm,
So anyone who's familiar with that, Toyota developed that. A lot of companies domestically in the United States use it. It's this process of continuous improvement. The idea, down to the smallest level of detail, providing you with incremental improvements in your manufacturing process. And the idea behind it is a search for perfection that you'll never attain or achieve, but it's worth your time and effort. And so time optimization leans into that, in that first, think incrementally, small steps. You're not going to change overnight, but those
sure.
small steps can lead to really dramatic in changes over time, and that you're never going to be perfect. And that's okay, because the effort is well worth the results you're going to get from it.
Sure. I feel like it's kind of also a mindset shift where you're kind of going from that reactive to the proactive because I feel like if I'm always reacting, it's almost like defense and offense in sports, whatever sport has offense and defense for you. But I feel like time management is more defense, whereas time optimization is more offense. I'm assuming there is some mindset shifts that are in there. Do you work with people in that? If I'm struggling with that part of this, is that something that you guys help us with at Infinity Lifestyle Design?
Yeah, thank you. I love your analogy, the sports analogy of being on offense versus defense. Because then what are you doing? You're drawing the plays up. You're the
Right.
one that, if it's football, you're the quarterback who's calling the play, sometimes an audible at the line of scrimmage, to adapt to the circumstances that you're seeing in front of you. So I love that analogy. And yeah, I work with people, really. The first step I do is show me your calendar. And when I see a calendar, I typically see something that's populated with a series of meetings, whether they have started it or someone else wants their time. And then the rest of it's blank. and I say, so what's happening in the blank?
Right.
And typically at that point, they'll say, well, I'm going to work on some tasks and projects. I said, well, what if you get a meeting bully or a client who like all of a sudden says, boom, I need this time in what you were going to devote to an important element.
Sure.
And that's where it's kind of like, well, then I have to figure out what to do. Well, take the figuring out away from a sense of decide if you're going to allow that interruption of time.
Yeah. And I see a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too. I try to schedule my time for, tasks like follow up or research. I try to do that type of stuff. Prepping for today was on my schedule. So I try to do that because I know if there's a blank there, I kind of like have this pile of work next to me and I just always seem to take the top piece, right? Well, the bottom one never really gets done, and then it's a just in time type of fire thing. So, I love that piece of actually scheduling your behaviors, scheduling because again, I agree when I work with clients and they ask me about time, it's like I look at their schedule and there's our meeting sitting there, right? We're in that hour, 2 hour meeting. Well, then the 4 hours before it and the 4 hours after it, there's nothing. And it's like,
Right.
well, what do you do in that time? And that's where, like you said, they just get that done. So are you suggesting like 30-minute chunks, 15-minute chunks, 60-minute chunks? Do you have any feedback for somebody listening that on how they could improve their schedule?
So for administrative, repetitive tasks, things that you're just, you have to do every day, then I would say smaller chunks are better because it can give you a false sense of accomplishment. Hey, I just answered 50 emails. How many
Yeah,
of those really meant anything for you? So smaller chunks there. It is then when you have something more in depth, whether it's preparation for a client presentation or the actual client meeting, those areas there are usually longer blocks because you want dedicated, focused time to be able to be as productive or active as possible during those. But whether it's short or long, you also need to be intentional to put breaks in between. And I define a break as stepping away from the environment you are in right now into another environment. And I caution people, it doesn't mean that you stop looking at your computer screen and then pick up your phone to engage on social media. That to me is not a good break. To me, a break
yeah,
is getting and moving either to, if you're in your business, to a different spot in your business, or better yet, just go out and spend 10 minutes outdoors. It resets your brain,
mm,
particularly if you have to go in and do heavy focused work after that
sure.
break.
Wow, that's great. Now, I have a question because I've seen like different research on this, and I seem to remember like there's optimal amounts of work time, and then there's an optimum amount of, break time. And again, I'm going to guess at some numbers. Like I've seen research like that says every 30 minutes, 26 minutes work and 4 minutes of a break. Some of them say 45 minutes or 50 minutes, I think it was, and then 10 minutes. What have you seen work the best, David, in that respect for somebody listening? Because it's hard. Like I have to say, it's hard for us entrepreneurs to put our pen down or put our computer down and literally walk outside and do something else. But I see the research and it's so powerful. What is the time thing? What's the time pieces that you've seen work the best in that?
So I think if you have a predictable schedule, or particularly if you're leading a team and your team has very specific, say, key performance indicators or metrics that they work under, they have to make so many calls per hour or something to that effect. I like shorter time periods there with short breaks because what they're doing is very repetitive, predictable, and they need those frequent little respites, almost like mini vacations, to then reset them up. If you're working on project-based activities and longer things that desire your focus, then I think you can extend those out, maybe even beyond the hour. Cal Newport wrote a great book called Deep Work. And in his case, He's in the coding industry, in the computer industry. Sometimes you need dedicated focused time. The idea, though, is economics, the law of diminishing marginal returns or utility will come into play, where at some point you're going to hit a tipping point where as you work, your productivity diminishes. So I would say really try not to go beyond 2 or 3 hours of deep work without stopping and taking some type of break. But depending on what you do dictates the frequency of your break.
Gotcha. I think so. My takeaway then, David, is to make sure that you schedule those breaks in somehow so that you're able to, finish in a strong way. Because yeah, I know for myself, when I'm able to even just stand out in the sun for 5 minutes, it just, boy, it makes such a difference, as opposed to sitting in front of a computer. So I want to talk about your book here for a little bit before we end. So you create this book called The Time Optimized Life. So obviously we talked about time optimization versus time management. What are some of the takeaways from your book for somebody listening that may want to grab a copy? What are some of the takeaways that you've noticed in your time research in this topic?
So thank you. The outline of the book actually comes from an assessment that I use and I work with clients on called the time management analysis. And in that, it really looks at six, if you break one of them up, six major categories. And it's first of all, the most important one that people are challenged on is focus. And that's broken into inner focus and outer focus. Those are the two areas that I come to time and time again that I work with clients on. But then there's also general planning. How do you plan? How do you organize your time? And what's your personal care element around that time? And when you group all these together, there are particular patterns that people fall into, and the assessment allows me to then customize that. Well, I wrote the book on the premise of it is not follow these 5 principles and your life is going to magically change. Because Dave, you and I are going to use our time differently. We're just going
Sure.
to, there are strengths that you have that I don't have and vice versa. So the idea behind the book is for you to call out your strengths and get better at those and work on those because they're all interrelated. So when you identify one area specifically that you start to work on, you're going to find the other elements in your life improve as well. And so the time optimized life helps you do all that on your specific terms.
So I wrote down focus, inner and outer. What was the second one? I was writing the first one down.
Planning was the second
Planning,
one.
and then organize, and then personal care.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So the focus, inner and outer, planning, organize, and then personal care. So this is kind of the second time that you brought this up, and it kind of ties into one of the questions that I had, because you talked about personal care before. So, I think we as entrepreneurs, a lot of times, the last person we take care of is ourselves. The
Mhm.
last one that we tend to our needs for, we take care of our customer, our team, our vendors, we take care of society. Sometimes, usually we're the last one to, take care of ourselves. How does that in time, where's the connection between those two? Because I'd love for this to get unpacked for somebody listening today.
That is the most underappreciated and not really focused on part of using time. And again, it might sound counterintuitive because you have to spend time on it,
Yep.
but I have 4 components around personal care. The first one is exercise. What can you do? Try to at least 30 minutes a day or at least 30 minutes 3 times a week that you're doing something that gets your heart rate up. Now, there's a lot more you can and should do, but if you're like, where do I start? Start there.
Sure.
Something that naturally raises your heart rate up, that's beneficial, not just stress, not caused by
Sure.
stress. The second element that I do is we talked about is breaks. Formal breaks during the day helps recharge your brain, and sometimes your body too, depending on what you do. Another element there, and I'm not a nutritionist, but also what are you putting in your body to help it be energized? And then another component I tie into that is sleep. Really try to tell people try to get 7 hours of sleep. If you're at 5 now, then again, try to go to 5.5, go to 6. And then finally, a less one, it depends on your approach, but I do believe that there's a spiritual component to our use of time. For me as a Christian, it's under the formal guise of my religion, but the idea that you're spending time on something greater than just yourself, whatever that is, when you mix all that personal care elements in together, it gives you this wonderful opportunity to recharge your body to
Yeah,
then be productive when you need it to be.
that's awesome. So your personal care includes exercise, breaks, nutrition, sleep, and taking care of the spiritual part of your life. So
Correct.
those are awesome. You know, there's when you think about time, all of a sudden it kind of, takes on a whole bigger, you know, importance because of some of the things that you're saying. So you had a question in one of the things that I was doing research about. I want to ask you this as we start to land today, because you asked a question of like, are your activities aligned with your values and goals? So I wanted to kind of unpack that the last chunk today, because I feel like we're all so busy doing so many things. And, I want to make sure and give some, wisdom to somebody that's really busy, but maybe the busy isn't in alignment with either their values or their goals. So when you wrote that, what was kind of the impetus? What were you thinking about when you wrote that, David?
Well, particularly for individuals who are entrepreneurs, if you think about what your life is tied a lot to your business, and most businesses, again, even if you work for a company, you're going to find many have vision or mission statements. What is this overarching thing that drives the business forward? And what I find is most people, when you say, okay, well, or we say, what do we do for a living? We ask each other. That's normally a first question when you meet somebody. What do you do for a living? And what I want to do with that question that you raised is to change people's attitude and say, don't define what you do for a living, define what is your purpose in life, or what is your mission or vision statement for what your life is about. That then, to me, as I encourage clients, becomes your overarching statement that then defines how you're going to use your time. And again, your career could be very much tied to that, and that's okay. But the idea is whatever important decision I choose to make in my life or plan or want to do is done through the lens of this purpose statement. So then therefore I'm fulfilling that purpose. I'm not just either working or I'm not just busy, but I'm
Sure.
doing defined quality time.
Wow, that's really good. So for anyone listening, it's just kind of a reality check. I think it's like just a kick in the chops, where it's like, hey, I'm so busy. I wrote down when he talked about that, the overarching purpose here, the reason you're here. I help people with purpose, to try to grow on purpose, the name of my book, because I feel like purpose and intentionality are so really missing today. So that's what mine is. For you guys listening and gals listening around the world, just come up with your own, think about that and make sure that your activities are aligning with your values and goals. If they're not, what a great day to make some of these small incremental shifts that David's been talking about. Two questions, and I'm going to let you go. What would your tip of the day be for somebody listening? Maybe it's something that you've shared already, you want to reemphasize. Maybe there's something else on your heart that you want to put out to these listeners around the world. So, what would your tip of the day be?
My tip is something I constantly tell myself, and that is be more patient. If you look at anything that is good that happens in your life, it probably takes longer than you anticipate, and the journey to get to that result is much different than what you anticipated. So for me, if it's a very important element in my life, I try to calculate how much time it's going to take me, and then I add at least 50% to it because it's going to change. So just
Sure.
be patient.
Wow, that's awesome. Yes, and be patient with your family, be patient with others. I mean, there's just so much grace that's needed in this world today. So that's fantastic. For people that want to learn more about you, David, something that you said sparked something. Maybe they want to grab a copy of your book. Maybe they want to talk more about something with you. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, Dave, first of all, thank you so much again for the time today. It's been a lot of fun for me. Uh, I would just simply go to my website, infinitylifestyledesign.com. Again, one word, infinitylifestyledesign.com. And on the front page, you can do a couple things. One is you can go click on learn about the book. You can download chapter 1 of the book. You can figure out what the heck is this whole time optimization thing is like. And then it's available, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever fine books are sold, you can get it. And then also, if you're interested in trying, how do I identify my own opportunities? Just click further down or scroll further down on the page, and you can actually take the time management analysis yourself and get a
Mm,
free summary report to give you this idea of, wow, I'm really struggling on focus, or
yeah.
wow, I really need to work on personal care. It'll give you an opportunity for you to say, where should I start first to help improve my time?
Wow, that's fantastic. So if you go to infinitylifestyledesign.com, that's the best place to take the free assessment. What a great spot to start. So I just want to encourage people listening as we land today, rather than jump into your next routine activity, whatever you have next, just take a minute and just let what David said sink in, because something that you just heard in the last 40 minutes here, something can change the way your trajectory is in your life. And that's why we bring this show every week. That's why David's here, is to really help one person. I mean, we all think that, man, we got to help the millions. I don't know about you, David. I'm happy if when I get one guy or one girl that says, "Hey, this was fantastic. This changed something about my trajectory in my life." I think that that's so powerful. So, thank you so much, David, for hanging out with us today. I'm going to download that. I'm going to let you know where my missing pieces are and where I'm strong, because that to me is a really powerful tool as a start on this journey. So, thank you for offering that. Thanks for all that you're doing in this field, and I can't wait to keep learning from you.
Thank you, sir. Again, I appreciate it. And to your listeners, small incremental steps. Give yourself, I love the word grace you used earlier. Give yourself grace.